Hello, it's Cherie, and welcome to another Women Seeking Wholeness Wednesday. This week is a charged topic for me. If any of you have been following me on my personal social media sites, or if you're friends with me, you'll know that I'm going through a really painful divorce right now. After 24 years and 5 children, and just trying to come to terms with healing my own soul from that and maintaining a space of respect for Jeff and where he is at, and of course our children. And so coming into this topic of polygamy with Warren Jeff's 65th wife, it's been kind of triggering for me. Not that Jeff is anywhere near the Warren Jeffs type, but if you aren't from Utah, which I'm assuming most of you listening aren't, and if you aren't acquainted with the fundamental teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Mormon, you would be unfamiliar with who Warren Jeffs is and what polygamy, how it really came to be in terms of polygamy being instituted in the early days of the church. But this has always been a very charged topic for me from the time I was a young girl that we even have this history. And so I've been fascinated with how it started and why and what, when, where, how, when I gave myself that permission to really climb into it. And then I happened upon Briell, and we have a mutual friend, Bridget, Cook Birch, who actually said, you guys need to talk to each other. You guys are both feisty and you both feel some passion around this topic of having courage and calling out distortion. And, as you'll listen to Briell, you'll see that she is on a crusade, but it's very gentle. And I feel some allegiance there for me as well, in terms of I don't want to burn things down. I just want to spread awareness. And I want people to know that their sovereign soul's voice is the most important voice in the universe to them, because it's always aligned with God, the divine source, whatever you call that higher power. It is always, always aligned, and it lives in you. So you'll hear her very, very fascinating story. And if you go into the show notes, you'll read that she's very aligned with lots of nonprofits and sort of crusades and societies and different kinds of volunteer work that helps to do some awareness and recovery with those who've gone through cults, those who've gone through trauma, domestic abuse, and whatnot. So you'll love this discussion, but it's not light listening. It is pretty heavy. And also, please if you feel the call to join my retreat, we're coming up. I think it's less than 1 month away now. Maybe exactly 1 month away, October 24th to the 26th. And it is all about soul sovereignty, interestingly enough. And I do have some spaces left, and it's going to be beautiful. And I'm very, very excited about it. So go to cherieburton.com, very top of my site, and you will see some details on how to register for that. Also on my Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook page, there's links. But enjoy this discussion as much as you can enjoy, or be illuminated, be amazed at this discussion with Briell as she talks to us about what she has walked through and how she had the courage to leave. All right, welcome everybody. Today we've got a really special guest who I have not actually met in person, but we've had a couple of really beautiful phone conversations. I think we were on the phone well over an hour and a half on one of those. I was just so fascinated with these sequestered, secretive, fundamentalist communities where certain practices and behaviors are condoned that we would think abhorrent, but to somebody raised in that environment, there's certain things that rise up in their soul that they don't know how to place, that they know are wrong, because that's their programming and that's their culture. How could it be wrong? But something in their soul is like, this is not sitting well with me. And then maybe they have a point of reckoning or a point of awakening where they realize, no, this is wrong, and I don't want to be part of it. And that's the guest we have today. And this is Briell. Hi, Briell.
Hi.
Well, thank you for your courage. And I know we've kind of decided to call this episode The Courage to Leave. And the courage to leave is about not just ending an unhealthy relationship or certain traditions that are unhealthy. The courage to leave could be just leaving some bad habits behind, or leaving behind things. Basically, it's just having the courage to wake up and get out of anything that isn't for your highest good. So even though Briell is representing something very extreme, very dangerous, and very traumatic, I would encourage you to insert yourself in her story in things that could potentially be traumatizing for you or damaging to you, in whatever way, shape, or form that isn't making you feel good and loving your life, and also contributing to your purpose and the greater good of humanity. So let's dive in, Briell, because your story is so fascinating. And I love how you are just, not only did you leave, but now you're like, sort of got this whistleblower archetype where you're like, there's so much injustice here that I have to speak up. So you have a book in the works with a major publisher. And it was my friend, our mutual friend, Bridget Cook Birch, that aligned us and told us about about each other, that she's helping to facilitate that for you. But the reason I wanted to bring you in is because even though the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormon, as it has been called, is not the same thing as what you were raised with, they're definitely influenced by the same origin, or the same origin story, which is Joseph Smith, the founder, and polygamy, which was instituted in the 1800s. Probably as early, they're saying, as like the 1830s, which there's some debate about when it started and how. But the fact of the matter is, this Warren Jeffs, who is a byproduct of the dark fruits of polygamy that were instituted in the early days of the LDS Church. So let's launch into, because you're now 33 years old, you're happily married, but you walk through hell. I mean, some of the things you told me are truly remarkable in terms of how you were able to keep a level head. But you were his 65th wife. So I just have to start there, because I know you have a whole childhood story. But you were 18 when you were betrothed, and was it an actual ceremony? Was it were there a lot of people there? Was it celebratory, or was it? Let's talk about the actual wedding itself, the wedding day, the wedding night, the ceremony.
Okay. So when Warren just became the leader of the church, he had been a big influence in my life, my entire life, up until I left. But he escaped. Anyway, he became the leader about a few months before I turned 18 years old. So that's a big factor why I made it to 18 years old. Because when he became the leader, he started to implement new doctrine really strongly, which before that, it was only repeated doctrine, mostly from Joseph Smith. Every once in a while, there was something new, but mostly the people were considered condemned and not worthy of the new doctrine. But Warren Jeffs started to say immediately when he became the leader, and somewhat before he was prepping the people, that the ones that were worthy weren't going to be held back by the ones that weren't worthy anymore. And so he was going to take the ones that were worthy and train them on higher and higher doctrine, like
how do you
interpretations of Jesus's parables and stuff.
How do you deem oneself worthy? How is that measured? Is this just his own intuition saying that you're worthy? Does he take you through questions, or?
At first, it was just his intuition. He would give a call and say, so-and-so is ready. And so that's why a lot of the underage brides and things later, because he would call up the fathers and say, your daughter's ready. They didn't have a chance to say, my daughter is ready, like they did before. Before, they had to write a letter or something to say that their daughter was ready to get married. But when Warren Jeffs became the leader, he actually put the fathers in a really bad position, because most of the fathers were appointed marriages. Their wives were given to them. So when he called them up and told them that their daughter was underage, He just said, your daughter's ready to get married, even though she's 13 or 12 or whatever age. They had a choice of saying, yes, I agree, or no, I don't. But if they say no, they might lose their family. They might lose the wife that they do have, or the wives that they do have, and all of their children and everybody. So they had this choice of either watching their daughter from a distance, their underage daughter get married from a distance, and hopefully seeing that she's okay and still protecting as best as they can the rest of their family, or losing everyone and maybe going out into the world and maybe perhaps going through the court system and maybe getting him back.
Okay, first of all,
So I
cannot even wrap my head around this. Okay, the first thing that comes to my mind is, and I mean no disrespect, because you and I have had these conversations, and you know that I'm not trying to downplay the love that would exist there with families and whatnot. I know you said your father was really proactive about trying to protect you, but what I'm thinking in my mind as you're saying this is, what about the mothers? Did they get any kind of say or voice in what happens to their daughters? Was this all done through men, the fathers, prophet to father?
It's all done through men. All done through men.
Okay,
so my mother, yeah.
So
my mother,
go ahead.
When I was 18, 2 months and 1 day. So it was January 9th. And I can't remember the year, but I'm not good with years. Anyway, I was in the kitchen. I had a big day at school. I was teaching. I was an assistant to fourth grade in the fundamentalist schools that were all home schools. And they teach what you know, and hopefully it will be better than knowing nothing. So each generation, they're actually losing a little bit of knowledge, because you only collect so much and then you can only give so much. So each generation, they're actually losing a little bit of knowledge because they don't send their teachers to college. But anyway, I took a whole day at the school. I came home late because we had a party, and I was in the kitchen making dinner because it was my turn to make dinner. And I heard my mother scream behind me. She was standing behind me, and I heard her scream, "No." And I turned around, and my father was standing in the doorway, and he had a really flushed face. And he looked at me and he said, "Let's go on a drive." And mother wasn't invited. She had no say. She recognized his look because I'm her 11th child. And she had so many other ones that went through similar things. But she had no invitation. I didn't even really get the word of mouth that it was my marriage. But we had heard rumor that this had happened in the community before. So we highly suspected it was the marriage. And because of father's look and everything, we highly suspected it was the marriage. But he wasn't even allowed to tell us that I was going to my marriage. And so mother wasn't invited, or he would have told her. So just me and my father walked out the door, and
but your mother,
we were escorted.
Your mother actually knew what was happening, right? That's why, yeah.
She had intuition but she wasn't able to be told. So when I left, I didn't have a wedding dress on. I didn't even have the real words to even get it. Like, why did I run and grab my wedding dress when nobody tells me that this is really what we're, supposed to do? So I just walked out the door with my father, went on a drive, and we were escorted to a secret location. And the reason for the high security in the time that I was married was because Warren Jeffs, basically right when he became the leader, he decided he was going to run from the law. He was going to be in hiding forever because there was a court case pending or starting or whatever with some rapes that had happened in the school that I went to when I was a child. He was the principal, and there was a pending court case, and so he just immediately decided when he became the leader, he wasn't going to go to that. And he was just going to hide amongst the people that would accept him. And I don't remember knowing that at the time, but I may have been told and I just didn't sink in. But because we had always been told the law wasn't that important. But I just remember when I went to the ceremony, like when we had the ceremony.
Okay, so I just have to stop you right. I just have to ask you.
Yeah.
So literally your dad comes home, takes you out of your home, doesn't say anything to your mom. You leave your mother and your siblings and you go to a secret location. What is he telling you? Like, is he saying you're about to get married to Warren Jeffs, or is it?
My father didn't know who I was going to marry.
Oh, so your dad didn't even know.
He didn't have any idea. He just knew that it was about wedding, but he didn't know. We hadn't been told who I was supposed to marry yet.
Okay. I'm sorry. My blood is literally boiling. I can barely contain myself. I'm just dying here. Okay.
The weddings are all like that.
So they're all arranged. The mothers have no say.
Yes.
The daughters have no say. Like, do people ever fall in love? Like, in the community and just get married because they love each other? Or
that's part of the grooming. That's totally part of the grooming. They're educated. If they even think a thought about a boy without being told they can, then it's wrong.
So there's no natural affection in terms of attraction or any kind
it's
of.
Not explained. I'm sure there's. Yeah.
But
it's all told that it's bad. It's bad. It's bad. They separate the children in these homeschools at 4th grade. Boys and girls can't be in the same classroom. They might get tempted. It's not about falling in love and dating. It's about, they actually had a quote when I was growing up that said, "The Lord will give the best to those who leave the choice to Him." That was
boy.
the quote over the pulpit.
I wonder what the divine feminine,
so I don't
also known
anymore,
as our goddess, mother, feminine face of the divine, however they want to define that, Heavenly Mother. I wonder what she would say to that. I'm just saying. Okay, so
right.
So you get escorted. So the grooming really happened for you your whole life. Boys, it's evil to think about anything. Everything's been predestined for you. God has a plan for you, and you get to be thankful for whatever that is or shapes up to. But did you know as a girl that you would be assigned someday? Were you just waiting for the tap on the shoulder? Were you kind of waiting for that day, or what was your expectation there?
Yes, we did know that we would have, he went in detail in the trainings of just the public trainings that you can find online. I mean, not really online, but you can find them from people in the community and things. I have a copy of a lot of the public trainings, but those things, he went in detail about how the interview would look. There's 3 different routes that the leader can take. You don't get to choose. I mean, you can say yes or no, but I always, I think about it now and I'm like, how do you say yes and no to somebody you've never met? Like some of my sisters married people that they had never even heard of. Like even the community had 10,000 people in it. They had never met their husband. And so he tells them, do you say yes or no to so-and-so? And they have to say yes or no. And that's their choice. I'm like, how can that be choice when you don't even know the person?
Right.
How can you choose that?
It's coercion, but yeah, that's not free agency. So
yeah.
So you're groomed.
And they claim that's free agency because you said yes or you said no.
So Warren Jeffs' dad was the prophet before him, Rulon, right? Rulon Jeffs.
Yes. So
when Rulon Jeffs passed away, then Warren Jeffs became the prophet. Because you talked about him being the leader, but technically the term is prophet, right? So he's a prophet of your group.
Yes.
And so he delivers the public teachings, and that's considered the law. If the prophet says it, then it must be who are you to argue, right? Because if that's the same as God saying it, correct?
Yes. And it's more strict than the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church is pretty strict on that kind of thing. But they have at times updated their revelation in benefit of people, like got new revelation that actually makes things more legal, more better. Like one example is when they got the new revelation years ago that the people with colored skin could now receive the priesthood.
Right.
Well, none of that ever has happened in these fundamentalist groups.
Yeah, because none only, yes,
there's no hope of that.
Yeah. And this is for me where my critical thinking came into play, where I just really look at things and go, there's policy changes and then there's revelation. And sometimes groups that form, whether they have holy intention or they're totally ego-based, either way, there's always a set of rules or a set of standards of like who is in like the elite group, right? So I've always really struggled with that, even from way back when the Mormon Church was founded, because there is a lot of racist doctrine. There's a lot of misogynistic type of rhetoric, and when we say fundamentalism, we're saying what exists with those doctrines, and because there's a lot of levels to like doctrines, right? That word gets thrown out a lot, but that could mean just that person talking from his worldview, that prophet or leader, or it could be like, hey, I'm really clear that this is coming down from God, right? So doctrine is kind of just a catch-all phrase or term that we use for that. But when it comes to fundamentalism from the Mormon Church, that would infer that the fundamentals that were in place at the very foundation of that religion are never changed. Like you said, they're fundamental. If God said it back then, it keeps going. It doesn't stop. So there were some doctrines that were held up as truth in the early days of Mormonism that were not friendly to people of color. They were not friendly to women. And polygamy, I believe, is one of those that sprang from, hey, was this God? Was this a man? Was there a lot of loose interpretation happening? Did it just go amok? So I have my own feelings that are pretty strong around that, only because I see and have read volumes and volumes of information on it and the women that suffered and whatever. I'll be writing about it later. But when I see the fundamentalist groups, such as the one you were groomed in, it's just further evidence to me that God is not one of separating people in classes or genders or the color, their ethnic persuasions or whatever. Like he is one God of a sovereign. He is our sovereign God, and we are all on equal footing. And so there's no hierarchy in place. So when people defer their critical thinking and their lifestyle choices to a superior in the name of being a prophet or a leader, and they just give that power away. So I see that, for me, that's why I asked you about the mothers, because I see that so strongly, that the reason that these fundamentalist communities, in my opinion, are so to the extreme of devaluing the human soul and keeping people from true freedom is because they don't have that feminine voice or influence to balance out these fundamental regimes or foundational doctrines. So it's just so clear, right? Like, you know it now because you're not there. But as a child and as a developing teen, you have shared with me that even though you knew that this was probably coming down from God, or that was your construct, you also knew there were things that weren't right about it. Like you felt it in your soul.
Right. I couldn't express those, though. There was so much peer pressure to be faithful and loyal. And so I didn't dare ever express it, but I did feel it. I know I felt it, but I didn't dare express it to anyone. My parents, my friends, like I couldn't, to even think that was like temptation from the devil.
Yeah.
And
so
you would be,
definitely,
to word it is another step.
Yeah, the stranglehold on expression, expression of thought, expression of voice, that the grooming around that to me is the saddest for the women is the saddest. And I'm sure the boys too, because if they're so evil, if they're having these natural thoughts of when they mature and whatnot. Okay. So you get escorted to a secret location. Now walk us through what happened after your dad was with you. Was he emotional? He
was with me. He was crying. He told me he had written a letter. I don't know for sure because in Warren Jeff's journals that are online, people have found him talking about that day and saying that he did call my father and he did tell him I was ready. But my father told me in the car that he wrote the letter that morning. So I kind of believe my father, but at the same time, I've had, like Bridget told me, it's probably because your father was trying to protect you or something. He didn't want, he had more love, and he wanted to look out for me. He had this, so anyway.
And you're 18, and you're 18 years old. So he's still at that tender age.
It is tender, but in there, the fathers usually, even before Warren Jeffs, they would usually get them married around 18 because it's the legal age. It's the age. They don't believe in law very much, but they do believe that if you don't let your daughters get married, even at the legal age, which is 18, then they can just go off and make the decision on their own. They don't need the father anymore.
Okay.
But most people want that recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Most people want that recommend from their father because it actually gives you status in the church.
Wow.
So the fathers didn't want to hold you past 18 very bad because that would affect more things. And so most of the fathers, when they were 18, were like, okay, you're ready.
So your dad, even though he's feeling this emotion, even though he is, kind of taking you like as a lamb to the slaughter, like I'm just going to use a really strong term there, right? He believed, I don't know where he stands now. We can speak to that, but he believed that he was really doing God's work. He really believed that it was the will of God.
He told me now that because he got kicked out a week after I escaped and lost his family and everything. And he doesn't hold it against me. I think it was because of my escape, but he doesn't. And he tells me now that we're both out, he asked me why about like the marriage that we're getting into. He's like, I didn't want you to marry Warren Jeffs. Like they were terrified. My parents had a lot more knowledge than I did. But yeah, I had a lot of signs that I was teased a lot about marrying Warren Jeffs, and I didn't know why. But I think the way he acted made everybody concerned for me. Because like all of my sisters got a cedar chest on their birthday when they turned 18 or 17. And they would, from my parents, and they would fill it up with kitchen supplies and coffee makers.
Yeah, it's a hope chest.
They believed in coffee, but hope chest stuff. But I didn't get any of that. So it was a really big sign to me that they expected I was going to go into his family. And they were all terrified for me. That's why my mother screamed no. That's why my father was crying. Like they were terrified.
Wait a minute. You said something about coffee. I can't get past that. Say that again. So they drink coffee?
Have coffee at the time. I don't know if they still do.
Oh, okay.
They did.
Interesting. Because that's definitely a taboo, at least from the word of wisdom standpoint, that's definitely a taboo substance, even to this day in Mormonism. So they are feeling this angst of like, what was the point at which your dad knew that it was Warren Jeffs that you were marrying once he took you to the location?
I don't know for sure because he's never shared that with me. He's never told me when he thought that, but I was probably pretty young. because of the grooming process. Like they recognized it. My whole family would say, my sister older than me would say, I would never want to marry Warren Jeffs, but you're going to. That's how
Wow.
she
So
would always talk.
you were kind of targeted very young then. So you were groomed for that. So,
Yeah.
but everyone's groomed, right? I mean, not just you, but it's just a matter of who you're going to be assigned to, but everyone gets the same grooming to a degree.
Yeah. They all get groomed, but it's not all like, and then they don't always know exactly who the person's going to marry. Like they do have, like, they watch for that instead of watching for somebody to date. They all kind of keep their eyes perked for who the leader is paying attention to when you walk through the line, or, the conversations are completely different. The conversations are, I think that you are going to go into so-and-so's family. I think, and it's like a teasing. It's not about you. Do you like so-and-so? It's not about that. It's like, who does the leader think that is hinting around about?
This scenario you're painting for me, Brielle, could not be more opposite to the concept of soul sovereignty than anything. Like, it's just beyond me that everything's predetermined, everything's controlled for you. You're deeply programmed, right, to just defer to external authority,
Yes.
prophet, and priesthood leaders. So let's go back to the secret location. So did your dad just drop you off and then you went somewhere and then Warren Jeffs was
No,
there?
he came in with me.
Okay.
He came in with me. We sat in the waiting room for a little bit. And then we went up to the main room. They escorted us up there where Warren Jeffs was. And we sat in front of him. And I had nightmares like my whole childhood of this day. And it was like a dimly lit room. It was almost identical to my nightmares. Like I dreamed that, because he had 3 scenarios. I told you there was 3 routes that he could take in this ceremony, in this situation. And one of them was he would just tell you who you're supposed to marry right off. Like he'd just say, the Lord tells me you're supposed to marry so-and-so. Or he could say, do you have any impressions that you feel like God has told you? And then I get to tell you if they're right or wrong. And if you lie to God, then there's a repercussion. If you say no, there's a repercussion. When he tells you who you're supposed to marry, if you say no, you get a repercussion. If you lie to God and say, I don't have an impression, so there's always a punishment on the no side. And then the third route was he could actually tell you, go find somebody. I want you to go out into the community, find somebody, come back and ask me if you found the right person, and I can tell you if that was right or wrong.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So everything gets filtered through that intuition. Well, quote unquote intuition, right? It's personal opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was it, so you walked into a dimly lit room then?
Yeah. And he was sitting in the front. It was exactly like my nightmares. And in my nightmares, he would turn to me and he would say, do you have any impressions? So he took the second route. Do you have any impressions of who God wants you to marry? Because he doesn't want to take the blame. And every time in my nightmares, I would wake up like shaking at that point. So I never saw what happened past that. But when I went in there, that's exactly what happened. He turned to me and he said, do you have any impressions of who God wants you to marry? And I knew if I lied, because he groomed me. So if he tells me all this stuff about if I lie to God and all this stuff, I would get a severe punishment. And I may never get married. Like, do I want to stay in my family forever? That's what I was thinking. Do I want to stay in my family forever?
Do I want to be with my family in the afterlife?
Never get married?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or do I want to just try this out? And I didn't know much about marriage at all. So I just thought, I turned away and I said, I am wondering if I'm supposed to go in the family with my sister who was already married to him. I said her name. And he said, you're right. God has given you such a strong testimony of him.
Mm.
And I went into shock. Like I started to like panic really a lot because of my childhood experience. And I haven't gone into a lot of detail here about that yet, but I felt like I wouldn't be very high in his family. I had a lot of reasons in my mind where I didn't really want to go into his family, but I didn't think I could avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, I didn't think I would make it past getting into his family. And, I'd get into his family and be like the low class. And that played out true later.
Because there's a certain pecking order to his wives, right? Because you were number 65.
In his family, he's a pedophile. So the children, young ones come first usually. And then he had a few older ones that were like secretaries and stuff. And he kept one favorite wife with him all the time and had a few others that he liked pretty well that he would use a lot. But he had a system where, I didn't know this at the time, but later I learned that he had all say if you got to spend any time with him. And he would just come to you and say, you're worthy of this now, right now.
Worthy of having...
spending time with him in any scenario. Like if it was just a walk, or you never got to have a rotation. You didn't know when your turn was coming. You just had to pray every day that you were beautiful enough or whatever.
I'm sorry. I just cannot I just cannot go there in my, okay. So like basically like you would only be counted worthy enough to be graced with being in his presence kind of thing. And everyone's okay with that. No one rebels against it. Is there scuttle behind the scenes? Like, oh my gosh, this guy's, or is it just don't even go there in your head? He's the prophet. Is there any scuttle at all? I mean,
don't even go there.
Okay.
Well, it's don't even go there because, like at the time he was pulling out the elite people, and he was the one that had all say if you got to receive the greater trainings and be in the holy place, and even a lot of the mothers, especially the mothers, were only worthy to be with their kids if he chose them.
Oh.
So he was filtering them, and then some people were sent away into these houses and hiding. I mean, they never were very special to him. So I later went into some of these houses and saw how ladies were abandoned for years. Literally didn't see Warren Jeffs or any of the children for years. And they felt it was their fault because he told them they're just not worthy. In my brain, I didn't accept it. I was like, no, he is not attracted to you. I felt that in my soul, even though I didn't know much about it. I was like,
that's what your soul knew.
Like you can't convince somebody to like you. I mean, so I went a different route. He told me that I needed to,
Sorry to interrupt you. So he told you, sorry, finish that sentence. He told
me to pray for inspiration from God for the next steps in my life. Like every day, that was my only thing I had to do, was pray this certain way, hear God's answer and go and do it. And then pray that same pattern again and repeat the cycle. Like it was simple. A child can understand this. Well, the thing is he was correcting people like a lot. So that night when I got married, I noticed that he was really negative on the wedding night. He sent me home because I went into shock and I wasn't responding to him like he wanted me to. And I didn't really know how to really. So he sent me home to my father's family.
So he was was he trying to be affectionate with you or make sexual advances, or is that what you were saying? Okay.
After he sent everybody out of the room after the ceremony, and he tried to get close to me, and I wouldn't respond. I didn't know anything very much. So I acted like I was in a daze. And he asked me if I was close to my mother, and I said no. I remember saying no to that question. He asked me some other questions I don't remember, but he did say, call my father back in, and sent me back to my father's house. And then he told my father to not let me, that we were both not to tell anybody in the family if I was married or not. So I get home and the whole house is clean because my mother had really high tuition that's what it was, that I was going to get married. My dinner's all made. Everybody's dressed up with their hair combed really nice and waiting to see my husband, because that's what happened in the past with all my sisters and brothers. They just come home with a husband or they come home with a wife. And they're all dressed up waiting. And I walk in there and I can't even confirm if I'm married or not. And they're all asking me, are you married? Are you not? And all I did is just laugh because I couldn't say anything. Well, that night when I went to bed, my mother slipped a note under my door and she said, I'm your mother and I know you are married. Just because of intuition.
Wow. Cool. But did you talk? And
I couldn't confirm it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the next thing he did, so he sent me home on my wedding night. The next thing he did was Warren just told my father I couldn't tell the family. And also I needed to go to this specific work project meeting in the morning, which usually men only went to. In our family, we didn't always go to those because my mother thought that it was for men, because it was to assign people to go volunteer and donate their time and energy to work on people's houses. And they were all assigned by the priesthood and the church on Saturday morning to go and do these free work projects. And it wasn't really for the women. The women could volunteer to be a cook or something, but they weren't assigned to that. It's just it was different for the women. So my mother just never went to those. Some families did, but my mother never did. So he told us that he wanted all of us to go to that meeting, which was really different because I didn't know why he wanted me to go to that meeting. I'm like, okay, we'll go, but why? What's there going to be? Well, he had already shut down all the main service, this main general meetings on Sunday. He had shut those down in the creek and told everybody he was going to take the more holy and elite people and call them individually to updated trainings. And so we knew that he was doing that, and he had shut down the general meetings because everybody wasn't worthy of hearing what he had to say. Really, he was running from the law. But anyway, so I go to this meeting in the morning and I'm standing up. We went in, we sat down, and I see him come in. So this was actually the last meeting that he had ever went to in the creek, public meeting. And it was a work project meeting. And he walked down the aisles before it started and passed out corrections, to fathers that had been on the stand for years and fathers that, had been really prominent figures in the church for many generations. And so, their fathers and their fathers, these are Barlows and these are, people that we have looked up to. And he's passing them out these papers and they're sitting next to their wives and now they're not married. He gets up in church and talks about what the papers say and how he needed to tell the whole audience to not trust them ever again because they're master deceivers, and that now they're not married to their wives. They need to go on repentance missions, to go off in the distance and pray to maybe be called back someday. And really, they posed a threat for him. But in my mind, I'm sitting in the audience the day after I get married to him. And to me, it looks like there's no hope. I'm like, he teaches persuasion through love, through all of this stuff, marriage and stuff throughout my whole life. But he's not giving that. He's threatening me. It felt like a big threat, telling me I'm in charge and you better do what I say. Instead of inviting me to anything. He's just giving out corrections to these people that have tried so hard,
And so that didn't land as something right to you. You just kind of knew that.
No, that was a threat. And so I'm like, you specifically told me to come to this meeting. If he would have done that and not invited me to that meeting, it would have been different. But because he deliberately requested I be there to see that, was just
Like,
insulting,
was just a showing of his power to keep you in line and to keep you subservient, honestly. So I know that some of the stuff became normalized in terms of, I know you said you had a traumatic experience, and you can share as little as much or as much as you want to with that. But usually when people have a trauma, they either repress it and just keep going, or and it can later become a point of awakening. So there's always, a gift on the other side of it, no matter how dark it is. I know you said you had a couple of awakenings even prior to being assigned to Mary Warren Jeffs, where you certain things just didn't land right with your soul. You just knew that there was some discrepancy. You couldn't always put your finger on it, but it just didn't feel right. One of the things, and we'll get to that. One of the things that I've found in my work with just sensory integration and trauma work and emotional healing is that, and also with yoga training, is that the body never lies. So the body is a living receptacle of truth. I mean, we can have different things like that are off balance with things we crave or whatever. But when it comes to, it's kind of our barometer, if you will. And even the spirit works in the body. So when you said you went into shock and that you kind of were in a daze and whatnot, and you weren't responsive to him, that was your body's messaging of, this isn't right. This is dark. And thank heaven that you did, because can you imagine? Because you never consummated your marriage with him, the two of you. You never actually had sexual relations. So it could have gone there that first night, but your body protected you. That's how I see it, is your body just, all the protective mechanisms came up to shield you from that. Now, that's not to say that somebody who's in a similar situation that would also have those feelings, that some people still get victimized. Some perpetrators are so cunning and so manipulative, and they just don't care. They wouldn't have cared if you were in shock. They would just, whatever. And he strikes me as somebody that creepy, but for you,
he did. He, at the time, I don't think he was really attracted to me. I really don't. He's a pedophile. And I was 18 at this time. I think when I was younger, he did, like when I was 14, I went and stayed with my sister for a week at his father's house, because my sister was actually married to Warren Jeffs' father first, and then she married Warren Jeffs after, a little bit before me. So I knew she was married to Warren Jeffs at the time when I went into my ceremony. But when I went and stayed with her for that week, when she was married to his father, then I got a lot of people in the family telling me, like, really treating me really extra special. Like, how are you? And all these things. And later, after I went into his family, like, they didn't treat me that way until I went and stayed there that week. When I went into his family, a lot of them said, when I walked out of the room, he would follow me with his eyes completely from beginning to end. I was 14. And so they all knew I was going to go into his family someday. So I think he was attracted to me when I was young. But because I'm now 18, it's not as big a deal to him.
So you said he was a pedophile, and he was
sick, but
he liked boys and girls. That's been documented. If you had to estimate in your estimates, and then also with some of the legal teams you've worked with, investigators, what are the estimates of the people that he's actually perpetrated against?
I have no idea. I've never heard a number on it. There's quite a few, though. There's quite a few people that were actually touched by him as children. And probably more of those people would be people that he thought he wouldn't be able to later. So like with me having potential of being a wife someday, he's probably going to wait. Yeah, I don't know of any of his wives who said that about him before.
So I understand too with fundamentalism, like if you go back to some of the earliest teachings of the Latter-day Saint Church back in the 1800s, there's some like Journal of Discourses and different quotes by early prophets, Brigham Young, John Taylor, and so forth, that actually are documented that say that the more, and I don't have the quote right in front of me, but I have gathered a plethora of them that are well documented that state that something to the effect that the more, as a call out to the men, like the more the priesthood brethren, the more women or spiritual wives or females that you can have sealed to you or married to you in this life, the greater your power in the afterlife. So the more, and this is 1800s, early Mormonism,
Right.
well documented, well backed up with scripture, et cetera, to justify the giving of women to men, the exchange of women in these quorums of wives or sealings or dynasties, if you will, of women that actually multiplied your power as a god or a glorified being as a man. The more women that you had in your, I call it a heavenly harem. I don't know what else you would call it, but this whole idea of, concubines and wives and women, really commoditizing women, to me, knowing that it's not just in this life, but it's an afterlife thing, compounds the soul shrinking, or the soul disease the soul sickness that comes to a woman in these communities. And I've read many journals of women in early Mormonism who had the same sort of struggle or fear. It's not only am I like, this is my lot here in the mortal world, but this is also my lot in the afterlife. This is what I have to look forward to. This is my, because I'm a woman. And
right.
Did you ever have any awakening to that part? Like, that can't be the way it is? Or did you rebel? Did you have a feisty moment with it? Did you have a wrestle when you prayed? And was there anything that came up for you in your younger years, and then especially after being married to Warren Jeffs, that made you think, gosh, I don't know how I feel about this as my destiny?
The biggest thing that struck me was not really in relation to the polygamy. It's not because I am for polygamy. It's because I just decided from early on I was going in to marry Warren Jeffs for God. Like, I wanted to be close to God. I had always heard all these things about God, and I lived for God. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm never going to have kids, but I'm not here for Warren Jeffs. I'm here for God. So I had a bunch of friends, and I was totally willing to never, ever see Warren Jeffs if that was what it took. Like, I didn't care about Warren Jeffs, really. And I didn't see why I should, because I didn't have enough education about, attraction and stuff. I didn't know enough stuff. So I just thought, well, I'm never going to be jealous. And the only way I can protect my heart is to not care. Is to just have friends and say I'm single, I'm basically single. It feels just like being single when you don't love your husband.
So you went kind of from a shock, daze. Yeah, the shock, the daze, disorientation goes into the numbness.
Protecting my heart.
Yeah. Just a numbed out, like,
just protect my heart, protect myself.
Yeah.
And then so there's a lot of stories about how he noticed I was different, and he kept trying to find out what that difference was. And it wasn't for good reasons. He likes pain. So if he finds out your weaknesses and he finds out your strengths, he can use them to manipulate you better. But he did notice I was different, and he would try to draw out of me why I didn't care that I went home on the first night. He was like, I'm sorry I sent you home on the first night. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. I don't care. And he's like, I'm sorry I sent you home on the first night. He'd say it just like that. He'd say it like 4 times in a row. And I'm like, sparking my attention to think, oh, maybe that was a punishment. Maybe that was something bad. I didn't know that before. So, yeah. That was, so he would draw out of you what he wanted to hear, and then he would decide if he believes you or not, if you're telling him the truth or not.
Wow.
There was one point in my story where he decided that I had done something really bad. And so he told me to go he sent me to these repentance homes with my sister. And it was like a month or two after he took me to Texas. And he said, go, and I want you to go and write a confession letter. That was. I'd never written a confession letter. I had done, I'm not a perfect person. I'd made mistakes and stuff, but they weren't like the big ones. And in his mind, the reason why I wasn't responding right is because I needed to confess something. And so I went and searched up what a confession letter was. Like, I went and found my sister's tapes in her room, and she would write on top of it what it was about, the directives. And I had to re-listen to all the tapes and reevaluate how I thought of heaven with his interpretations, because my parents were a loving interpretation and his weren't. That was the biggest wake-up call to me, was that he was so harsh, because in his trainings he doesn't sound that way. So my parents always had this loving way of interpreting heaven, and it seemed possible to make it. That was my biggest wake-up call, when I figured out that he was going to correct me every single time I saw him, and he was going to just have this hatred about him that made it impossible to make it to heaven. How are you supposed to go through somebody that is filled with hate and make it?
Yeah.
That was my biggest wake-up call.
I know in the court trial, they used evidence to convict him. There was a certain audio with him and a 12-year-old girl that was really a situation that you were aware of, that you could have walked into, that could have been potentially, you would have been a part of that. And you can share as much or as little as you want to, but I know that was one of your, as you and I have talked before, that was one of your big red flags of, I need to get out of here. This is not right.
Yes. I can't go into a lot of detail about that, but because of my book and stuff, it will come out really, I need it to be really clear. And in this much time,
to give the full context. Yeah.
But the thing is I did walk away from it. Like, I figured out a way to act really, I was in a position also that made it easier for me than most of the family and most of his wives. And I played a part that made it so I went to a repentance home, which was better for me, because repentance homes, they're considered homes where you need to do better. And so he wasn't there a lot. And you're supposed to just pray to be a part of the elite. Well, I went there and I told him I'm not going to pray to ensure I don't go back before I'm ready. And I was gone for 2 years. He was so mad at me. But I stayed away until he got caught. So I wasn't involved in the actual things that were in the courts and stuff, which is a blessing. But I couldn't research routes out either. I couldn't figure out how to get out of there without getting, because I'm being guarded all the time with caretakers and in these houses that you can't go outside. And, I didn't know how to go about getting out. And I knew if I started to pray, I would just go to these elite groups that would be worse. So when he got caught, then I could start to pray again. And I started to research how to get out. But I was really, really bullied, because he would send people after me. And not only that, there was people that hated me within the group. I think some of it was because he told them to, and some of it was because they believed whatever they wanted to about me. I took a lot of self-care time, and that wasn't allowed. Like, I've heard from some people since that a lot of people just thought that I was selfish because I took self-care time.
Well,
that wasn't allowed in there at all.
That's really profound, because that tells me that because you took that time for self-care in the quote unquote repentance house. Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start with that repentance house idea. But the fact that you took time to take care of yourself was probably really pivotal in you garnering the courage to leave and get out. because you were not,
It was.
you were nurturing your soul. You were, and by osmosis, when you take the time to center yourself, breathe and do things that feed you, that soul voice gets louder and louder and louder. And pretty soon the things that were tolerable before seem now self-evident that they're something that should not be part of your life. So I just want to interject that because I think that's a pivotal part to your story. I mean, you had this like, I mean, I'm just trying to picture you, right? Because there's traditional clothing that's worn, right? It's long skirts for the women, long sleeve shirts as well, and hair doesn't get cut typically, right? I mean, that's where you see a lot of buns and whatnot because the women don't cut their hair. So everything's very controlled. You can't think certain things. You have to wear certain things. You have to be part of this repentance so you can be counted worthy to be in the elite group. And if you pray to God, you know, he's only going to really help the elite people. So you got to stay repenting. And that's just really a mind warp. But that high demand, heavily controlled environment, let's just call it what it is, a cult, doesn't lend itself to a lot of freedom of expression or self-care like you're talking about. It's all about the group think. It's all about serving the higher people in the elite group.
Yeah.
So how did you finally, I mean, what was the, like, if you could like look back and go, okay, what was the kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of your like, I'm done. That's it.
Yeah. When I was talking about like I saw the women be in these repentance homes for years. Like he's sending me away, telling me to go write a confession letter. And they're telling me I've been here for years, you know, he's started this mission way before he told everybody and, you know, all this stuff. And I'm like, why were you here for years? You know? So in my mind, that was when I started to do self-care. I'm like, I'm not going to take the prayer route that he's recommending to everybody. And also when I was thinking about the men, when he walked down the aisles and just passed out there's got to be a different route. And I'm like, I'm not going to take his route, which is the prayer route that God will just tell you what to do because it's obviously not working very well for all these elite people that are falling from heaven, you know, basically. I'm like, I'm going to go and study the truth. I'm like, I'm going to read the scripture and fill my mind with truth like Jesus did. Because Jesus is known for that. Like he has like when the temptations came, he reiterated the scripture. So I'm like, I'm going to take that route. I'm just going to go study. But he wouldn't allow me to study. I had to literally fight for that right. And that's what I call self-care time. I would go in the closet whenever everybody's gathering to stand around him and just watch him eat or something. And I'm in the closet. Like, I'm reading. Like, I don't want to miss my opportunity to read. And they're moving the house and I don't have an assignment. So I'm over in the other house ditching him reading.
Well,
like I literally did these things.
People who are controllers and narcissists like that, they know that when people start to get educated and build knowledge outside of the confines of their programming, they know that person's out. That person's going to leave. So they control the information.
Right.
And he is like the poster boy for narcissism to the most dark extreme. So you just start reading, and then you guys didn't have internet access, right? You didn't have a cell phone or anything. You didn't have a way to see like larger.
But we had his interpretations. All we had was Warren Jeff's interpretations of everything. And at the time, I believed in God, so I believed in his interpretations. That's all I'd ever heard. I believe in God still, but it's not the same God that I was raised with. At the time, I really heavily believed what he was saying, but it led me out, like you're saying. I didn't know it was getting, but he knew it was getting. It led me to realize more things, and it actually saved me, though. Even though it was his interpretations, I've had to since recover from that, kind of, because you know what you use to survive doesn't always help you to thrive. Mm-hmm. But I used, like, when I started to get bullied, his interpretations were the only thing that mattered in the minds of everybody that was bullying me. So it actually saved my life. But now I don't use it, really. I mean, I talk about it, but it's not the same. I don't have to have it every day, every second, you know?
You didn't need that validation. You're starting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think it's so interesting. Like I just when there's such a heavy cloak of authority that is vested in like one person or one small group of people, there's a definite perception of I can only learn things that are in the parameters of what is approved, right? Because if I go outside of that, I'm going to get deceived and be in Satan's grasp, and then I won't make it. And so I'm not going to make it with my family. I'm going to be apart from my family forever. And so most people, especially women, I would say, who are so always putting themselves last anyway, but in a really controlled environment like this, that's extreme. It's even more pronounced. And so there's an absolute disempowerment in terms of what do I want?
Yeah, his system is to run them in the ground. Like basically they give till they die, or they give until they lose their mind. And then he starts over with the kids. Like he doesn't give them the normal route where you self-care and then get more effective quality self-care and more effective quality. He doesn't do that. It's just give all that you possibly can, and then we'll start over with somebody else.
And also and it's also interesting to me that the deeper, probably more nefarious pieces to that are women are less important than men to God, and so are people of color, because in those fundamentalist communities of which you are a part, literally 100% white. It's just a Caucasian elite group. There's no, and at least from the race standpoint, they won't take people who are of mixed races. They're completely shunned from the community as being impure.
Right.
Yeah. And then women too.
Well, they can join, but they can't go very high. They can only get baptized.
Oh, okay. So they can get baptized.
Yeah, you can't go very high.
But you can't get like priesthood
you can never get married. You can never have kids.
Okay.
Until later down the road when Jesus comes again and teaches or something. Like they have this idea that Jesus is going to do something before it's allowed.
And also there's no, so they'll become white or something, or they become, I heard something.
It ties back to the doctrine of the war in heaven. It ties back to the war in heaven is, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but.
No, I'm curious.
It's about.
I'm familiar with that doctrine, but there's, I think, a lot of interpretations. But what is the one that they ascribe to?
Right. They talked about how Jesus is our elder brother, and when God asked somebody to come forward to atone for everyone, Jesus stepped forward, in the goodness of his heart, and accepted. And Lucifer also did, and wanted to do it his way because he had a better way than God's way. And everybody that fought valiantly for God are white, Caucasian, born in the priesthood.
Can you just insert a gag reflex right there? I know. And like I've heard the same thing in a different. Yeah. So that pretty much
that's white on the outside is just like layers. It's totally like layers.
So then, that just goes back to what I was saying, like people of color and women, because women can't have the priesthood, and people who are, Black or of other races, they obviously weren't as valiant as pre-existence. Neither were these women, because they didn't get the power of the priesthood.
They said that the Black people actually sat on the fence and just said, whoever wins, I'll be on their side. That's how they treated them. Like, it is so sad to me. I knew that was wrong. My soul told me that was wrong as a child, but I didn't understand it, Why,
well, I was, Briell, I was programmed with the same thing from the Mormon church in different circles. So that idea prevailed.
And then the people that fought for Lucifer didn't get a body. Yeah.
Yeah.
The people that fought for Lucifer never got a body.
The people that fought for Satan or didn't follow Christ became disembodied spirits, evil spirits and demons or whatever. And that the people, I was also programmed with people of color were fence sitters in the preexistence. I don't know where I heard it, but it was definitely a fundamentalist type of doctrine that was perpetuated in the early days of Mormonism that would prevail in some ideologies or some circles or with some people. And I would venture to say that there are many people that still believe that. So it's unfortunate that the crazy things get passed down. So let's, I'm trying to be mindful of our time. And I know, gosh, this is so fascinating. I cannot wait for your book to come out. I know that you did get to a point where it was unbearable. So you left, and I'm assuming that I know I have heard so many stories, and I've read The Witness Were Read that was about Rebecca Musser, who was one of the wives. Because I know after Warren Jeffs was arrested, you had told me too that he assigned 15 men to be seed bearers, or because he couldn't, because Warren himself, being the great, holy seed bearer, couldn't have children anymore because he's in jail. And how old was he when he was arrested?
He was, I don't know, 50 something, maybe almost 60, but
okay, so he's at least 30 years older than you.
Yeah.
But when he was arrested, then of course he can't propagate his seed, and so he assigned these 15 men to be seed bearers to carry on the elite, whatever
bloodline.
The bloodline, yeah. So you're like awakening to all this, and it's not feeling right for you. So you got to a point where what was, maybe we didn't quite get there, but what was like the straw that broke the camel's back for you, where you're like, I'm out of here?
Well, I confronted him on the doctrine of no love. Like, why do you not send any love out? Like, every time I talk to it's a correction. Like, this isn't going to work. I can't make it to heaven when there's no patience or invitation or no love at all. Like, God, if there's no mercy, how are you supposed to correct when you make a mistake? Like, how are you even supposed to be that knowledgeable to not make a mistake ever? That's, there has to be some kind of give somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
And so I confronted him on that after I identified, really, I felt it way before and I knew it was wrong, but I got brave enough to confront him in these repentance homes because I didn't have anything to do, really. I was just hanging out. But I wrote to him and asked him why there was no love. And then within 3 days, I felt really guilty because I knew you can't do that. And I wrote back and I said, maybe if I earn it, maybe someday I'll receive it, And he got the letter within 1 week, which is normal time for all the letters. They would arrive within a week usually. And he called me directly, just angry, furiously angry. And I already sent the other letter, which I wasn't supposed to send because he had a timeline for us to send our letters. I was supposed to only write one a week. But I happened to write 2 that week because I felt so guilty. But he calls me up furious after he gets the first letter, not knowing that I had sent the other one, which if he was inspired by God, which he claimed to be, he would have known. And he just yelled at me on the phone, telling me how I don't get to demand love. I have to earn it.
Oh, boy.
And I just sat there listening, like, I've already corrected this. I've already sent the other letter, and he hasn't got it, obviously. But why didn't God tell him that I sent it? So from that point on, I was pretty much bullied because I had questioned and voiced that question. It wasn't just a feeling after that. And he told me when he got my second letter, after 3 days, he called me up again. Really, really nice. Oh, I got your other letter. Yeah, if you earn it, I'll give it to you. And I'm just like, that's weird. But also, he's never going to. I just felt like he's never going to. And it proved to be true. My feeling of he's never going to say I earned enough. And I was there it took me a while to figure out how to get out, about 5 years. Like, to have everything. I'm kind of thorough with what I do. So, with the whole experience, I was bullied for 3 years solid. when he got caught and he could never consummate my marriage, then he sent me to Texas, and that's when I noticed being followed every day. And it was for 3 years solid before I worked my way back to the old compound, which is Colorado City, which has a mixture of people that aren't just only FLES. And when I made it there, I made a big decision to help the kids. And then I went, then I got locked up and
locked up, meaning you're just in a bedroom somewhere and you can't get out, or was it an actual prison?
It was in a bedroom with the doorknob turned around and the lock in the hallway, and there was 2 screws in the window. It was the kind of window that you had to lift up, and they put 2 screws above the second pane or whatever. And so I couldn't lift it up. And then I just listened. It was in one day only, because I listened for the caretaker to leave and my brother, but I listened for him to drive away, because I knew that if I started to mess with those, they told me to lay down and read. And I knew if I started to mess with those screws while he was there, he was going to walk in and put screws all up the window, and I wouldn't be able to have an opportunity to even try to get out. I didn't believe I would get out. I actually just didn't want to give up. And so I was just fighting to the end. And he ended up going to a meeting, which I didn't know about until later, that he was in a meeting. So it gave me more time to work on those screws. I found some scissors and unscrewed one side. I pounded on the other screw because it wasn't all the way screwed in because it was so tight. So it had a little bit sticking out, and I pounded on it until it broke off. And his wife was home. She came in and took everything I was using. She would walk around the other side and look in the window and just give me this look like, why are you doing this? But she never noticed that I had already gotten one screw out. So when it broke off the other screw, she gasped. I heard her gasp, but she thought I had another screw. And then it just went silent. Like, I didn't open any drawers. I didn't dare even get ID or anything. I didn't really know I needed ID because I never, we didn't have the same lifestyle as people in the regular world. So I didn't realize how important ID was. But even if I had have realized that, there would have been no way to get it, because once I started opening drawers, she would know I was leaving. So she thought I laid down and started reading. It was quiet. But really, I climbed out the window and I exited.
Wow. I'm like cheering you on. That's like a movie.
Yeah. And I ran through, I had tried many times to escape. I'd been picked up on the road and things because people from the FLDS would see me. So I took back roads. I went through the creek. It took me longer to get to the house I was going to. It was actually a house that my nieces and nephews told me about, because their grandparents had all left together. Everybody that was still at home left together. I knew where they lived. So I decided I would try to get to their house. And I ran through all these back roads to get there. And right before I got to their house, there was a lady sitting out in the yard right next door to them. And she was wearing pants. I didn't know her. But she said, "Can I help you?" She was out in her yard meditating. And I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to get up to that house. And she's like, okay. So she drove me up there. And she said, "Should I sit in the car or should I go in with you?" And I said, "We might as well come in." Well, the family I was running to had too recently left themselves and didn't know the organizations on the outside that were helping people. Mm. And the lady that brought me in, that drove me up there, she's the one that knew who to call. So they called these organizations, and the family tried to convince me that they knew me, they could help me. And I'm like, no, this is too serious. Like, I've been brought back so many times and I can't risk it this time. So I convinced them to drive me halfway down out of the town. By the end of the day, it was like hours in between. But they drove me halfway. And then my adopted mom, who's now adopted me, was in an organization helping. She drove the other half of the way and picked me up and brought me to her house. I had never met her. She wasn't from the FLDS. She was from a different group. She had a lot of understanding, and she actually fought for me a lot. That made it even possible for me to really escape. She's now my mom, so she legally adopted me.
Wow.
Yeah, to giving me the right and the safety to not have to worry about ever being brought back. Because if anything, if anything happens, it would, if how parents sometimes have power of attorney, or, have some say, even as adults, if you're unconscious or something, it would always default to my adoptive parents now. It will never, ever go back as far as my biological parents.
Do you have any contact with your parents, your biological parents?
My father was kicked out 1 week after I escaped, and I've always been really close to my father. I know some people don't understand, and they hold things against fathers and stuff more than mothers, but I do get what he went through more, and he's always done everything he knew how to do for me. So I'm really close to him still, and he doesn't hold anything against me. I didn't talk to him for 2 years till I got my name changed, and I didn't tell him that I changed my name when I did finally find out about him and call him and all of that. I didn't tell him. And I actually didn't want to hurt him, so I just didn't tell him. But there was a point in my life where I ended up in the hospital, and I had walked away from the house and was missing for 3 days because the police had picked me up off the street and didn't tell anyone. And I was too sick to be able to communicate very well. So it was 3 days before my mom figured out where I was, my adoptive mom. And this is after I'd been legally adopted and everything. And in that process, she made flyers looking for me. And she had to choose between my old name and my new name to put on the flyer. And she knew if she put my old name, it would be a national name because it's all over the internet. But she also knew that if she put my new name, it would maybe leak out. So she cried a lot. But she finally chose my new name, and it did go through the crick, the flyer. I had friends messaging me, asking me, why I was in the hospital. I didn't see it till I got out. They're asking me, I saw this flyer. It looks like you, and it says this name on it. What's wrong? Are you okay? So at that point, I decided I would go and do the Dream Center. I would go down to the creek. I would not hide anymore because I didn't really need to, everybody would already know. Everybody that, it wasn't a secret anymore. And so I just decided to go and help people more than I was. I was trying to secretly before, but then I'm just like, I'm just going to go down to the creek. And I heard that I might be able to qualify for Warren Just House. And I knew the history of the town, how the land worked. And I'd been raised there, pretty much in that same community, even though it wasn't. I was born in Sandy, Utah, but they all eventually moved down to the creek. But I had a lot of relatives there. So I knew the history. I knew how the land worked. And I decided to apply for his house, which is 45 bedrooms. I knew if I didn't go after it, maybe somebody would probably get it that didn't have any ties to the family. Anyway, so that's a long story. I don't know how much of that you want.
No, that's awesome. It just paints such a heroic picture of you, just digging your heels in and being like, I am going to bust out of here. And what an amazing journey. Like I'm just in awe. I think what you're doing now is so powerful with speaking out and doing advocacy work. Cause I know you did secure the Warren Just House. And didn't you sell it to the Dream Center? So it's just all about loving,
worldwide organization.
Like, isn't it more? Yeah, it's like a transition center, right? It's like a 45 bed transition center.
Yeah.
So there's still, I know you feel this, and I feel it too, because I don't have a direct connection outside of some people like you that I've met that have left those cults. But I think that what we're all kind of feeling, whether you have, Mormon roots where polygamy was practiced for X amount of, years, century, over 100 years, or where you just kind of see the fruits of that. And that there's still people like you out there that no matter if it was dissolved in, through a manifesto or whether the law doesn't recognize it, there are still people practicing this. It was something that started and it never stopped. And it's not healthy for families, and it's denigrating to women. And the strong souls like you, that's what you're feeling now, is like, how do I keep other people from experiencing what I did? And I know that you have a lot of passion with that, because you have told me that there's probably a lot of little tiny Warren Jeffs that are going to be popping out, because they're still getting that programming.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was trying to, insert a little bit, but I didn't want to cut you off.
No, you're good.
I sat in the room when Warren Jeffs put pedophilia among the elite. It's not a doctrine that is public. It's not one of their, but he put pedophilia in the doctrine among the elite people. And once, like we talked about, the fundamentalists, they put things in their doctrine, they don't leave. So there's not really a way to get it out of the doctrine. So there's high risk, high chance, most likely certain, that whoever follows Warren Jeffs after he dies will continue pedophilia. If they believe in Warren Jeffs, they believe in pedophilia.
Because his word was the word of God, and it's unchanging and it's eternal, and you can't modify it because it came from God. That's scary. I think that it's basically sex trafficking.
Very scary. It's sex trafficking. It's the same thing as what happened in the polygamy scenario. Like if you duplicate how polygamy kept sinking through the lines and kept, happening, even though they figured out a way to make it practice without, without going through the law, and, and they just wouldn't give it up. That's what we're facing with this new generation of people that believe in Warren Jeffs with pedophilia. Like if we don't do something more than what they did with polygamy, we will be facing like enormous amounts in the generations, like way more work than the generations to come.
Well, Briell, you are a voice of power, and I know you and I have talked about doing some work to give a greater voice and a greater messaging out to those who may be feeling in bondage or who are dealing with the after effects of some of these high demand cults, and who are now stepping into a place of power. And so I honor you for that. I'm with you in that. I wanted to do this episode because I think it's pertinent. Again, you kind of represent the extreme of disempowerment, how you were groomed and what you walked through, but how you got on the other side of it, I think will be inspiring to a lot of other people who are locked into something, whether it's a damaging relationship, a toxic substance, a group, a community, a belief system. A person practiced their substance that's not aligning for their higher good. It's people like you who get to be in that place of visibility that say, hey, if I can do it, if I can escape that, if I can get out of that, let me tell you, you can too, whatever it is for you. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we'll be aligning together in the very near future.
Yes, that sounds wonderful. Thanks.
Well, those of you who stuck with that discussion know that that took a lot of courage for her to speak out like that and to be that whistleblower. I think we can all take on that archetype. When we see and wake up to distortion, it then behooves us and becomes our responsibility to not only get ourselves out of that situation and blow the whistle, but then also be a presence for other people who are wanting to step into their own soul sovereignty and their own soul voice. I think that was the hardest thing for me to take in when she was talking about Warren is like, oh my gosh, like I was literally like breathing and tapping the whole time she was talking, because I get so triggered by this dominance and this women being seen as property, and the vacant looks in the eyes of these women who have been stripped of their power and their say. So we get to be the ones who hold form for women stepping into their voice and power. And if that's you at any level, and you are feeling silenced, or you are feeling caged, or you are feeling abused even, I would say, then it's your God-given right to find your tribe who can help you get the courage to leave. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next week on Women Seeking Wholeness.